When Ray Bradbury was presented with the idea for Spaceship Earth, he was told that it would be located physically and narratively at the heart of EPCOT, and that it ought to be about communication in the history of humankind. Spaceship Earth was a term popularized by a paper written by Buckminster Fuller in 1969 titled Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. But this was far from the first use of the name for our planet. It dates back to Henry George in 1879 and then George Orwell in 1937. In these early instances, Earth was equated to a ship at sea carrying humans and resources across an ocean of stars. It wasn't until the development of real functioning rocket ships that the spaceship portion of the metaphor came to acquire more cosmic meaning. Fuller's paper highlights the arbitrary nature of our economic system, automation's potential role in freeing humans from manual labor, and how wealth should be reframed to value the health of our planet over short-term financial gains. Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth also occasionally praises the tools developed by humans through the ages that have extended our potential beyond our physical limitations. Tools that have made our lives easier and that have allowed for new, previously unimaginable experiences. Buckminster Fuller, or Bucky as he liked to be called, influenced Spaceship Earth in more ways than one. We'll explore more of his impact a little later when we outline the building of Spaceship Earth. But for now, let's focus on Spaceship Earth in its initial written concept phase. Bradbury's concept script, Man and His Spaceship Earth, is prefaced by quotations in a section titled Thoughts About Our Spaceship Earth. Astronaut William A. Anders is quoted saying this: "The Earth looked so tiny in the heavens that there were times during the Apollo 8 mission when I had trouble finding it. If you can imagine yourself in a darkened room with only one clearly visible object, a small blue-green sphere about the size of a Christmas tree ornament, then you can begin to grasp what the Earth looks like from space. I think that all of us subconsciously think that the Earth is flat or at least almost infinite. Let me assure you that rather than a massive giant, it should be thought of as the fragile Christmas tree ball, which we should handle with considerable care." Most astronauts report a significant shift in perspective upon seeing the Earth from beyond the safe bubble of our atmosphere, a sort of refocusing of reality. From up above, we are not isolated countries and continents. We are large land masses surrounded by immense and stunningly blue oceans. This shift, which is sometimes referred to as the overview effect, can be transformative. Only a small number of people have experienced the sight of Earth from outer space with their own eyes. But here at the top of Bradbury's outline, that feeling, that reality, acts as an undercurrent for the journey we are about to make. Followed by the prefacing quotations, Bradbury launches into the prologue. Over the course of the 4 prologue pages, Bradbury describes the goals of the journey ahead. It will be an optimistic depiction of humankind's continuing experience of survival and the ever-evolving methods and tools of communication. In short, it is a history of humankind told through the evolution of communication technologies. When the history catches up to the 20th century, the show will point to certain challenges that humanity will face in the near future, namely the overwhelming volume of information and misinformation, leading to a disorganized clutter for human beings to contend with. He also outlines 3 distinct phases of the story. Recording: how communication was first put down in drawings and writings. Dissemination: how communication spread from one isolated group to another, further allowing humans to share ideas and expand their intellectual horizons. Processing: how after recording and disseminating, information can now be stored, sorted, and summoned at speeds and volumes never imagined by our earliest ancestors. Other curiosities found in Bradbury's Spaceship Earth include 1. A clear direction down through the dust of the past, a rising up to greet tomorrow, and then a return down to Earth today. Prior to a finalized track layout, a downward then upward motion was to be achieved by a show building located behind the sphere. When the entirety of the track was moved into the sphere, the directions would be inverted, resulting in an upwards then downwards ride path. 2. Walls and forums. Walls are the first surfaces used for recording information, but Bradbury continues to use walls to refer to pages in books and digital hard drives. He also uses forums as a name for a gathering of people. He explains that the first forum was in the caves around the fire where early humans shared their first thoughts and first spoken words. There's also the Roman Forum and other forums in between the Stone Age and now, but EPCOT Center is the next great forum where people will gather from around the world to experience new technological advancements, to immerse themselves in unfamiliar global cultures, and to learn from the past so that they may shape the future. In addition to the metaphorical use of walls and forums, there are a few other notable motifs sprinkled throughout the script. The repeated use of caves and fires are notable for their philosophical resonance. Plato's Cave, if I may briefly summarize, is a story used to explain the simultaneous pain and expanded curiosity that occurs when people uncover new truths about their reality. As people climb up out of the cave, they will eventually come to see the sun, the ultimate truth. But the confrontation with that truth will be painful to reckon with at first. Another poetic motif is dust, possibly alluding to the phrase "from dust to dust," and thereby calling out an unspoken importance of human mortality. 4. The voice of universal man tells the story of Spaceship Earth. In Act 1, the audience is introduced to the narrator by a melding together of all human voices as they play out over time, moving backwards from John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. to Abraham Lincoln, Queen Victoria, Julius Caesar, and many others. Hitler is included in this meld, which is a choice. While it is strongly off-putting to hear a voice that many consider to be the epitome of evil, this inclusion does touch on a challenging truth of our history. Our existence includes the harm we as a species have caused to ourselves and others and to our planet. Our history is an amalgamation of wars, travesties, and destructive events on a global scale. Our history is also a collection of technological advancements, small acts of kindness, and scientific discoveries that have allowed us to understand the world and the universe in which we live. It is not surprising in the least that Hitler was refused a voice in EPCOT's centerpiece attraction, but the voice that narrates Bradbury's Spaceship Earth is both the immense good and the unforgivable bad of human existence. And in this optimistic depiction of us, the ultimate focus is on our potential for good and for understanding. As with any theme park ride or show, there is both a visual and auditory component to Spaceship Earth's final delivery. Here, in Bradbury's blueprint for a yet-to-be-defined theme park attraction, he provides descriptions of visual scenes and spoken narration. Since the entirety of the script was fair game for Imagineers to adapt into a finished dark ride, bits and pieces of the script would appear in different arrangements of narration and show scene in future versions of the ride. For now, we will focus most of our analyzing energies on the overall story outlined by Bradbury. Later, we will delve into the words of Bradbury's narrator when compared with the other narrators of Spaceship Earth. Preface to the story. Before launching into the 3 phases and the 5 acts of Spaceship Earth, Bradbury takes another moment to outline the journey we are about to embark upon through prehistoric, ancient, medieval, and then modern times, to eventually be summoned, called, raised up beyond into the future. We are then greeted by a voice that will later be identified as the voice of universal man.
Where did we come from? Some of this we know. Where are we going? Some of this we dream. How do we get there? Let me chart the ways. The future has many arts, many sciences, many paths, many doors.
Some of this we will see again. But for now, as context for our narrator, Bradbury specifies that our guide is a voice from all time, past, present, and future. Perhaps all-knowing, perhaps all-seeing, but just short of God. He does speak as if he is human. Where did we come from? Where are we going? Turning the page, we arrive in Act 1. Descent into the past.
As the audience enters the domed theater, vague faces float in and out of mists and vapors, coming clear then dissolving into others. We hear the voices of Kennedy, dedicating us to space travel, Martin Luther King speaking of his dream, then shifting from real voices, swiftly we move back to hear the simulated words of Queen Victoria, Lincoln, Napoleon being crowned emperor, Columbus telling his sailors to sail on, the crowds crying, "Hail Caesar."
Although Spaceship Earth would ultimately morph into a dark ride with an omnimover system, that information does not appear here. Instead, Bradbury envisions a domed theater screen as the stage for our story. The faces emerging and dissolving in the mists are a physical representation of what he describes next. The clips of voices through time, a blending of all human voices, great and small, coming together to form the voice of our narrator.
More swiftly and more swiftly, names, sounds, bells, impulses of light, as suns and moons glide over, stars wheel. The voices and sounds are multitudinous, as if made of all the reverberations and thunders of the past. Gradually, all the voices of time and history blend into a single voice, like a wave on the shore. It is the voice of universal man, asking us to speculate on our past.
The backward motion of time travel picks up speed as we are transported back, until we are officially introduced to our narrator. The name Universal Man is only ever used in the descriptive passages of this script. It's unclear whether or not the name would have been used to refer to the narrator in the attraction's setup, but we can surmise from the later versions of Spaceship Earth that the idea of a Universal Man was eventually dropped from the narrator character altogether. It may go without saying, but it is still important to note that man, as used by Bradbury, was used to refer to all humans, not just men. While most of the historical figures used to create the voice of the Universal Man are men, there is one woman included in the mix, Queen Victoria. The use of man has fallen out of favor for human or humanity to avoid any assumptions about who is included in the term. We may not all be men, but we are all human. The narrator reiterates the questions we have heard in the preface and then directs us to sink into the past to find ourselves, and time reverses.
As they listen to Universal Man speak, the audience becomes involved in a physical experience that seems to sink them into layers of the past. The cities begin to unbuild themselves, and we see in these sculpted pieces of antiquity the historical remnants of man through the ages. The Rhodes Colossus dismantles itself. The Roman Forum with its pillars falls stone by stone. We see the Sphinx return to the dust from which it came. We glide through layers of Angkor Wat, see Incan sculptures and Mayan rocks, chiseled with blunt suns, uncarve themselves, until at last the ancient caves surround us. The first leg of our journey terminates at the beginning of time. We sit in blackness.
In some sort of physical or visual way, the time travelers sink as time moves quickly backwards. And as the marvels of the ancient world unbuild, we get a hint of some moments of history we will soon be revisiting, namely ancient Egypt and ancient caves. In the end, we find ourselves in darkness, nothing around to indicate where or when we are. Now, time traveler, if this seems like a familiar scene to find yourself in, you may have happened to visit another EPCOT pavilion sometime between 1982 and 2018. As will become ever more apparent, the history of time and space proved to be too much to contain within the sphere of Spaceship Earth alone. The next sequence, the beginning of Act 2, was ultimately cut from Spaceship Earth and incorporated into the universe of energy. Another story for another day, perhaps. Act 2, Journey Out of the Past. In the darkness, our guide returns, telling us that we are in the time before all time, in the night that is endless night, in the unlit waiting dawn, where vast things stir and breathe. Then,
out of the blackness comes an explosion of color, light, and sound. The great Andromeda Nebula spirals by, tossing out new suns and planets. The Horsehead Nebula spins up. The Orion Nebula goes over and around in heartbeats of universal push and shove. And as we move, we see the fireball comet nearest us cool down into a sphere and form before our eyes. Its fires fill our vision. It is Earth. The seas pull back and the walls of Earth rear up. Shadows form and move along the walls, and suddenly become the dinosaurs. We move now in a parade of beasts on left and right, led by a flight of pterodactyls overhead.
The universe begins as an explosion out of the dark void, the Big Bang. Some amount of time between 12 and 13 billion years of cosmic expansion play out in rapid succession until we see, for a moment, dinosaurs at the 65 million years ago milestone.
These, with other flying reptiles, surge toward the blind future. Everywhere the beasts who shared the earth long before man move on the long march into time. The dinosaurs fall, great tonnages of nightmare flesh knocked together, concussions of vapor, water, fire, from which rise shadows, shapes, simian evolutions, half-dreamed on preconcepts of ape and man. No sooner seen, they run to hide in grass, in trees, in caves.
Another 58 million years pass in seconds, and there we are. Well, almost. The ape-like humans presented here have no idea who they will evolve to be millions of generations after them. Act 2 is short on the page, but long in the cosmic perspective. It's hard to say exactly what this sequence would have looked like in Spaceship Earth, but it is important to bear in mind that this story will be about survival and communication. Evolution and the natural processes that have shaped our world for millennia are not the primary focus of this story. It therefore makes sense that our time machines travel back only so far as they need to in the 1982 version of Spaceship Earth. There is certainly more to see if those time machines were to travel back farther, which is likely why this segment and its continuation into Act 3 was used in another attraction entirely. Act 3. Man, his struggle to survive begins.
A flash of lightning, a mighty roll of thunder, a great volcanic eruption. In the fiery light, we see revealed a half-naked ape-man approaching a tree set afire by the flowing lava. Cautiously, he touches a burning branch, holds it high with awe and surprise, carries it off into the black darkness of night. Distant voices, grunts and cries of struggle herald the presence of Cro-Magnon man. And now the roar, the anguished trumpet of the huge, dread, hairy mammoth beast. We are in the midst of a fierce encounter from all sides. Ancient man attacks the beast with fiery torch.
Act 3 begins at the moment of first discovery. And this is where the Spaceship Earth we know today takes its lead from Bradbury's blueprint. While the discovery of fire as a tool appears more decidedly in the universe of energy, the battle between early humans and woolly mammoths is the first scene that makes an appearance in all versions of Spaceship Earth, starting with Bradbury's. Fire sparks human progress, and here, in Bradbury's concept script, it plays a pivotal role throughout. Next, we move into the cave.
We enter a long, dimly lit cavern. Shadows of cave-dwelling people are all around. Women and children gnawing on the bones of the great beast, brave hunters still brandishing their spears, reliving the excitement of the great hunt. And in the flickering light of the warming fire, we see man drawing on the walls of his cave, drawing the very story of his battle to survive the mammoth beast. What they left behind, what we have seen drawn and recorded on cave walls, of course, are the minutes of the original meeting in time's first forum. Ancient man met ancient brother and exchanged ideas and information and triumphs and tales of how to meet the challenges of their time and survive.
These are the first recordings of our existence. Cave paintings to set on stone the first stories of our survival, something of us to leave behind. Storytelling is and always has been a way for us to communicate and connect. First, stories spoken aloud around a fire, kept safe by cave walls, and now, so many stories in so many mediums and in so many environments around the world. Bradbury makes reference to business meetings and minutes as we know them today, and while the comparison seems a bit absurd, he's not entirely wrong. Gathering, sharing, and conversing have always been a strength of ours. There is knowledge to be gained together that can never be gained alone. Simultaneously, there are details that were remembered by those cave walls that would never have been remembered by human minds alone. Next, we witness moments in ancient Egypt.
Now our time machines move on from the cave of Stone Age man, entering a labyrinth of man-made walls of historical data. A passage through time, illustrating the development of man's ability to record information. As we pass along this wall, the recordings become hieroglyphics and pictographs in the land of Egyptian pharaohs.
Ancient Egypt's man-made walls and pictographic engravings serve as a mirror from the last scene to the present one. There are still walls, there are still recordings, and those recordings are grounded in visual representations of the world. Hieroglyphics are part image, part language, and while it is not stated here, spoken communication has developed further as well. Storytelling does not appear in this description, but if ancient Egypt is well known for anything, it's for their gods. Ancient Egyptian beliefs and mythologies are rich in character, plot, conflict, and theme, all the makings of great stories. Gods symbolize the things that define human existence: fertility, war, life, death, order, chaos, the sun, the air. Stories give us something to believe when we have questions with no discernible answers. What is the meaning of life? Why does the universe exist? Is death more than it appears to be? It is important to keep in mind that in future scenes, science and philosophy will not be content to answer questions with stories alone, but will seek answers through scientific methods and reason. One more point of note unstated here in this optimistic portrayal of the past. With pharaohs comes defined social hierarchies, with the lucky few placed at the top and the many more hard laborers occupying the bottom. Ancient Egypt prospered, It progressed language and communication technologies, it told and recorded stories we still know today, and it was built on the back of inequality. There's always good and bad. Both can be true. Both have always been true. Next up on our journey through time are Phoenician sailing ships.
On all sides, sails rise up, wooden oars dip deeply into blue waters. Our time machine becomes a Phoenician galley, bound for ancient Greece. On the Grecian beach, Phoenician merchants display their coveted wares. A slab of clay, inscribed with curious wedge-shaped symbols, is examined, questioned, discussed, deliberated, and debated by Greek and Phoenician traders. Our traders are disseminating not only their goods, but also their knowledge of the world they live in.
The recording of information leads to the dissemination of knowledge. It is not just the transportation of information that defines this moment, it is the transportation across seas from one community to another. Communication and connection, then, are both physically and intellectually expanded or restrained. Here we are presented with one instance of language development with the Phoenician version of an early alphabet, but it is simultaneously fascinating and essential to bear in mind that different language systems developed separate from this one. The Proto-Semitic language systems of the East would develop into Japanese, Korean, and Chinese, which all evolved differently from one another as well. In other words, language systems are cool, and the Phoenician abjads, which led to alphabets, are just one notable moment in our shared history. Likewise, Phoenician ship routes developed separately and were actually preceded by Polynesian voyages from island to island. These islanders with languages of their own were taking to sea approximately 2,000 years before the Phoenicians built their first ships. So it would seem as though the inherent need to communicate and explore beyond our horizon is universally human and not unique to one culture alone. After the Phoenicians and Grecian beaches, Bradbury launches into the Middle Ages. I have included the narrator's text here, as this scene will later be cut from physical manifestations of Spaceship Earth and will not prove useful in a comparative context.
Soldiers clash, and we see the glint of sword and hear the clang of spear in medieval battle. At last, the fighting fades, and a lone campfire flares. In a royal tent, the knights and nobles confront their tyrant king. A truce, and to this war at last an end, and from the king no spoken pledge, but a recorded deed. Now our dreams, once locked in chiseled walls, took wing, sent forth on parchment sheet.
In the later Spaceship Earths, Egyptian papyrus will be referenced as the first early form of paper that allowed the kings or pharaohs to record and locally disseminate information. In Bradbury's blueprint, it is medieval parchment that allows written word to take wing. Papyrus and parchment then serve somewhat similar roles in the history of Spaceship Earth. The attraction, they are both early paper-like material, and yet there is another development that does not appear in any version of Spaceship Earth. In the time between 100 BC and 100 AD, the Chinese were the first to develop a pulp-based paper that would then travel from the east to the west. Of course, in these brief summaries of historical and technological turning points, it would be impossible to cover every detail, every brushstroke of a 10,000-year-long picture, but there are notable omissions that beg the question, why? Here in this early concept script, there are other notable omissions that will appear in future Spaceship Earths: ancient Greek civilization, the Roman Empire, and the Islamic Golden Age. These will all later take the place of this script's Middle Ages sequence. The aforementioned parchment and the forgotten pulp paper process leads to further dissemination of information as
a new day dawns, and in the soft morning glow, we see that the data wall has become a giant wall of printing symbols. Typefaces, sheets of printed parchment, scrolls, bound volumes of illuminated manuscripts.
We arrive at scrolls, artfully handwritten scriptures, bound books, and printing presses all the same. The Renaissance, an explosion of arts and sciences, is set in motion by the printed word and by increased access to books and the ideas within. The Renaissance is another Eurocentric development, but a highly significant one. The printing process has changed, but in a little more than 500 years, books are essentially the same now as they were then, still conveying the words of our predecessors and our contemporaries across ages of time. If I may digress, we have reached a fun peculiarity in the script. Page 8A A, appearing between page 8 and page 9, presents us with the Industrial Revolution, titled specifically when eras of history have until now gone untitled in this script. These oddities may be the result of a page being forgotten or missed in the first typing of the script. Ray was probably still using a typewriter in 1977, so editing was not as seamless then as it is now. Here's what the page says.
The data wall becomes a cyclorama of symbols representing the primitive machinery of the Industrial Revolution. Steam-powered overland conveyances pace our journey.
Trains. Certainly steam-powered and overland, and a method of conveyance, or more simply put, transportation. Just as with the Phoenician ships, mobility is part and parcel to connectivity and communication across great distances. The first industrial revolution then carries into the second, from steam power to electricity, on the next page.
Now the wall becomes an abstract shape of crisscrossed, woven strands of wire, symbolically linking continents, countries, communities in remote and distant places. The staccato Morse code is heard, then the sound of voices in many languages, then static broken tones of familiar events and voices. Entertainment and events of the 30s and 40s, Fred Allen, Jack Benny, the Hindenburg disaster, Roosevelt's fireside chats, etc.
It is here in the script that the Eurocentric perspective of progress shifts decidedly to an American perspective. This is the point in our journey that starts to look a little bit more familiar to our more recent past and present. And while this scene is located in America with the TV stars and presidents to match, there is an attempt to present a sense of global connectivity. Many languages transmit through the wires, not just American English. The technology of the early 20th century allowed for news and knowledge to begin traveling the globe unaided by ship, train, car, horse, or foot. For the first time in our journey, a shoulder-to-shoulder diversity of people and language starts to become relevant and celebrated. The next titled section of Act 3 is the computer sequence for Spaceship Earth.
As the voice speaks, we pass beneath the communication satellite silently orbiting in space. Beyond, we see the towering outline of a modern city. As we approach, the sounds and sights of the city build to cacophonous crescendo. From all sides, we are bombarded with information and misinformation. We are battered by a cyclone of printed matter, books, magazines, newspapers. Garish neon lights offend the senses. We are drowned in a hurricane of TV images.
The first satellites were sent up into orbit in the late 50s, acting as transmitters for worldwide communication. With more information and ever fewer physical barriers to communication comes the trouble of too much stuff. Bradbury describes an overwhelming barrage of information from all possible sources, enhanced by the quick pace of this progress. The overwhelming nature of too much information is something we still contend with today, and Bradbury's note about misinformation may be more relevant than ever. But this problem also leads to the beginnings of a solution: computers.
We approach an electronic wall of countless blinking lights. We enter the computer and are submerged in a psychedelic experience created by colored lights swirling in wild abstract patterns. The sounds and the visuals subside and blend into the intelligible sounds of a space crew preparing for a space launch.
Computers are something of a magical tool, and all the more impressive when you remember that we developed them through sheer ingenuity and invention. Bradbury does seem to put a fair amount of faith in these computers, opting to describe the information now as clear and verified facts. But he's right about one thing. Computers helped us get to the moon, and it seems as though we are preparing for another rocket launch, one that we time travelers will embark upon. Act 4. Spaceship Earth.
On all sides the rockets flame. 2, 6, 8, 12, 20 rockets surround us in fire. With a shudder, a tremble, a roar, our time machine blasts off as if it were a spaceship for distant space. We blast straight up, rising on fire into that sky, pulled, pushed, bombarded. As Marco Polo and Columbus and Lewis and Clark before us, we are the new pioneers searching uncharted seas by the light of uncounted stars. The universe is ours to discover and explore.
Space is truly the final frontier, which all of this history of knowledge, technology, and communication has been leading. however unwittingly. And in 1977, in the midst of the Apollo era, space was indeed our next stage for human connection, understanding, and continued existence. Here at the top of Act 4, space is the next great unknown for humans to explore, as we have always been inclined to do. Although the invocation of Columbus and Lewis and Clark carry with them the ills of colonialism, in addition to being historically recognizable as pioneers. However, as we launch into space, barreling headlong into the stars, we are called to stop for just a moment longer and to look back and see the home we're leaving behind.
The flight abruptly slows, freezes. The journey's thunder roar ceases. The fires cut off. We float in serenity in the sky about the Earth and see it as a lonely, solitary island in space.
When the first color photograph of Earth as seen from lunar orbit was captured, it was the first time the people of planet Earth had seen their home for what it really was, a small blue sphere suspended in dark space. But it's one thing to see a photo of our world in a cosmic context. It is another thing to see it with your own eyes. Here in Bradbury's blueprint, we are treated to a taste of that experience. At this point in our journey, the narrator speaks a little longer than he has previously about anything in our past. Again, we will go into further details of his wish for us and for our Spaceship Earth when we look into the wishes of other future narrators of the Spaceship Earth story. For now, we are simply confronted with a glimpse of our world in all its solitude, serenity, and blue beauty. Act 5, Future World.
Now the engines of our rocket ship reverse. We begin our descent back to Spaceship Earth, and as we descend, as the Earth grows larger and closer, we hear the voice of Universal Man offering our promise and challenge.
In Act 5, we return to Earth, partially out of necessity. The chapter of our lives out in space has yet to be written and can only be written from here on Earth, and partly because there's something important waiting for us back on our Spaceship Earth, Future World.
Now Spaceship Earth is coming close. We enter its pull and shove and begin our orbit, preparing to land back at our destination, the Future World. The voice of Universal Man calls to the audience to come the rest of the way into the light, into the universe, into the future.
As we make our way back down to Earth, it is made known that we are making our way back to 1. Light. Light of day as we know it does not exist beyond the safety of our atmosphere, and sunlight is part of what sustains life. 2. The universe. But surely the universe exists out there, not here on Earth. The universe is all around us. And in our sliver of the universe, here we are, molded by evolution and technological progress, part of the universe itself. It was Carl Sagan who once said, "We are a way for the universe to know itself." The universe both surrounds us and is us. 3. The future. It will be what we make it to be. It is our responsibility, our stage, our forum, our opportunity.
And as the voice of Universal Man speaks, fire and flame surround us. We are wrenched by the sensation of re-entry and landing. And instantly, the exit doors fly open on all sides, and we are beckoned into the future world. This way to energy, this way to the seas, this way to the communicore, etc. So that the audience in the finale goes up to be let forth and begin their own personal search through the attractions, the multifold ideas, and the displays waiting for them just beyond in EPCOT's future world.
This Spaceship Earth ultimately serves as an introduction and entryway to EPCOT and the pavilions of Future World. This show, as outlined by Bradbury, is so thoroughly woven into the introduction of Future World that it places directions at the exit. Each person who goes forth from here is imagined to have their own unique and personal journey through what Bradbury considered to be the next great forum, a permanent and ever-evolving World's Fair, imbued with all the optimism and indeed futurism that Walt Disney imagined for an experimental prototype community of tomorrow. In 5 years between 77 and 82, the physical attributes of the Spaceship Earth attraction would shift and change, but the general trajectory of the script and some fragments of the original narration would remain. The geodesic sphere would be the first fully spherical structure of its kind. A previous geodesic sphere had appeared at Expo 67 in Montreal and was designed by Buckminster Fuller. In addition to popularizing Spaceship Earth as a title, he also popularized geodesic as a description description for these spherical structures. Structures like Bucky's geodesic spheres had actually been a staple of World's Fairs and Expos since the 1939 New York World's Fair. Trilon and Perisphere was the centerpiece of that fair. Perisphere measured 180 feet in diameter, quite similar to Spaceship Earth, and showcased a city of the future inside. Perisphere was later demolished, but then in 1964, another spherical monument was built in its place. Unisphere was the welcoming beacon of this fair and presented visitors with a stainless steel globe measuring 120 feet in diameter. Unisphere stands today as a historical remnant of the World's Fairs that took place in Flushing Meadows, New York. Then, at Montreal's Expo 67, the first geodesic sphere at a World's Fair, Biosphere, was home to the America Pavilion. So it would seem, based on the World's Fairs of 1977's recent memory, one could not have a World's Fair without an awe-inspiring sphere of some sort. It therefore tracks that a permanent World's Fair should have a sphere of its own. EPCOT and Spaceship Earth stood to bring together the technological developments of today and tomorrow and link them to a global perspective rich with a tapestry of cultures, faces, languages, and histories. These goals would manifest in Future World, the World Showcase, and all the pavilions found in each. While the story of Spaceship Earth is rooted in technological development, it is woven with the histories and cultures of humankind. More than any other attraction in Future World, Spaceship Earth is equal parts culture, art, music, and perspective only gained by travel, and technology, machines, tools, science, and mathematics. It may seem at times that the World Showcase half of EPCOT is somewhat oddly placed alongside the futurism of EPCOT's Future World, when in actuality, the half-and-half nature of the park is a more accurate depiction of the human experience. We are fascinated both by technological advancements and global cultures. We are linked to global communities by the technological storytelling of our past and present. In our human experience and in the story of Spaceship Earth, we never have one without the other. Technology is always informed by people. Spaceship Earth opened with EPCOT on October 1st, 1982. Future World offered a handful of completed pavilions and a few set for near-future debuts. The Land, Communicore, World of Motion, and the Universe of Energy pavilions were followed later by Horizons, Journey into Imagination, The Living Seas, and The Wonders of Life over the following 7 years. The World Showcase was home to Mexico, China, Italy, Germany, America, Japan, France, United Kingdom, and Canada pavilions, which would later be followed by Morocco in 1984 and Norway in 1988. Bradbury's script was always intended to be a blueprint for whatever the attraction would become, and indeed it was. When Spaceship Earth debuted in 1982, gone was the universal man as narrator, along with the ample talk of forums and walls. Bradbury's text was tailored to a ride path flanked by show scenes. The vehicles would remain time machines and would be designed as a continuously slow-moving Omnimover track system. With the Omnimover system, the individual ride vehicles are linked one after the other and placed evenly so as to occupy the entire track circuit rather than individually launched cars or trains. So if one car stops, the whole train stops. This allows for a constantly loading ride system, and if I may speak poetically, it creates a somewhat circular narrative, constantly embarking on a journey from the present to the past to the future, or a new present, in which we return changed, inspired, and armed with the knowledge of our responsibility for the future and for the continuance of our Spaceship Earth. Thank you for stopping by and listening to this, our Spaceship Earth essay. Tune in next week when we cross-examine the various iterations of Spaceship Earth and how the narrator's message has evolved through time. See you in the future, and until then, this is Ms. Morrow signing off.